This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host Phil Goldberg, author of American Veda. Our podcast, Spirit Matters, found at spiritmatterstalk.com. Our guest today, Larry Payne, PhD. He is an internationally respected yoga teacher, author, and founder of Yoga Therapy in America. He is the co-founder of the International Association of Yoga Therapists and the yoga curriculum at the UCLA School of Medicine. Larry, thank you so very much for taking the time to come on our podcast today.
Pleasure, sir.
Larry, you've been a fixture in the Los Angeles yoga scene for several decades. You're well known as creator or one of the founders of the discipline of yoga therapy. We want to get into all that, but first give us a sense of your own history and how you came to be a yoga teacher and what got you interested in the first place.
Well, thanks, Bill. You know, I was quite a jock, and I did, I played high school, college sports, and then I was a runner for about 15 years, and my back started really bothering me. So my running partner dragged me literally to a yoga class. And this lady was a disciple of Indra Devi. Unfortunately, she was compassionate. So at the end of her class, for the first time, this dog bite I had in my back for about a year was gone. And I also felt very high, very similar to smoking something. And I never looked back. I took that class. I went and found a teacher near me, got serious about it, and then just took off from there.
Let me follow up with that, Dennis. You mentioned Indra Devi, who was one of the great luminaries of yoga in the West, and you knew her. So maybe you can explain to the listeners who she was.
Well, Indra Devi was the daughter of a Russian, basically a very, like an actress and, very high-level society person, and I believe her father was Swedish. And she was a dancer, and she came to India, and when she came there, she just fell in love with India, and they fell in love with her. So she spent the rest of her life and her career going around and getting acquainted with these luminaries in India, and she studied with the Shivananda.
Mm-hmm.
She studied with the Krishnamacharya. She introduced the West to Sai Baba. She was amazing, and wherever she went, there was something special happening. I remember one story. I'll make it quick. The only press conference the Yoga Journal ever had was in Santa Monica, California, maybe 25 years ago, and they had Baron Baptiste be kind of the featured person because he was working with the daughter of one of the mamas and papas, so they were trying to get press. So he's there, and the camera's there, and so I come in the back with Indra Devi, and all of a sudden the cameraman, when he hears it's Indra Devi, he turns off of Baron Baptiste and just starts Indra Devi, and the whole rest of the time he was on her.
Mm-hmm. And she became very famous in L.A. and then in South America, where she.
Yeah, what happened is that after she opened the first yoga studio, arguably in the United States, but at least on the West Coast, back in the 40s, in Hollywood, and she had people like Marilyn Monroe and Gaynor and all these, Mule Brenner, and so. Then she opened up a place down in Mexico as a retreat. And while she was there, some people came and invited her to come to Buenos Aires. So she was invited to things all over the world. She spoke probably 7 languages. And I spent a lot of time with her. So anyway, and when she was there was a man in the audience named Piaro, who was the Argentine equivalent of Elvis Presley. And so he had this sensation that she was his adopted mother from another lifetime. So at his next concert, he announced that his adopted mother was having a yoga conference next weekend. 6,000 people showed up.
Wow.
Well, great promo.
They never let her go. They never
Yeah.
let her go.
Larry, I wanted to ask you something about yourself, and that was I read that in 2000 you were the first yoga teacher to be invited to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. How did that come about, and what was that like?
Well, what happened is that they were doing, on the weekend while they're all there, they always have some artistic thing. So they decided to go with Eastern art. So my partner on the book was Georg Feuerstein, who was America's authority on yoga, and he had 50 books. They invited him, and they got about a month out, and they asked him to teach a yoga class while he was there, and for some reason he refused to do that. He wanted to just do philosophy. So he recommended me.
Ah.
And that's how that happened. And they asked me if I had a website. This was 2000. My website had been up for 2 weeks. I said yes. And so another thing that happened when I was there is that somebody got sick. So they saw in my background that I had been in marketing and advertising. So they asked me to lead like a panel discussion. So, okay, so who's in the panel discussion? Mehmet Oz, before he was famous, big time. Dean Ornish, and several people like that. So I thought, what am I going to do? So I said, it's an honor to be here with all these people, but I think that we should meet their wonderful wives. So I introduced the wives, and Mehmet Oz's wife sent me a Christmas card for 7 years. But Quincy Jones was also there, and I was in a room with Yasser Arafat.
Oh, my goodness.
Only like maybe 30 people. And Goenka was there. I met him and hung out with him. So, I mean, that's a special thing in the World Economic Forum, really.
Did anybody follow up and really want to know more about yoga and doing yoga postures and improving themselves?
Well, Mehmet Oz, before he had his television show, he was really rolling. He had a column in the Reader's Digest, him and another gentleman from the Cleveland Clinic. So he stayed in touch with me, and he invited me to write in his column twice.
Oh, how interesting. And now he's advocating yoga, and he's involved with Dean Ornish and all that.
He's always been around. And also somebody who kind of snuck in there, I think what happened is that one year that Mehmet Oz went to Bhakti Fest.
Really?
And he met Steve Ross. And he invited Steve Ross onto his show.
Great.
And he was on his show, and
So Larry, you first came to yoga because of physical injury,
yes,
back pain, and became so enamored with it. You went to India, you got trained. At what point did you realize there was more to yoga than, say, physical therapy for your back, and that there was a tradition of mind and body and spirit? When did you realize that, and tell us a little bit about your training?
Well, I think I realized that when I had my first yoga teacher. He was a man who never wanted to be famous. He's still around. He teaches in places like 24 Hours Fitness. His spiritual name was Raghavan, and his name is Solomon Delgado. And he was trained in Shivananda, so he encouraged me to take classes and do fasting. So I did a 2-week fast at a place called Meadowlark and met the father of holistic medicine in America, Dr. Everett Loomis, who became my first mentor. So that's where I got inspired to change my career from advertising to be a yoga teacher. And my first teacher training was Shivananda. And, Shivananda with Swami Vishnu Devananda was pretty complete. It was all... Yeah. It wasn't just about doing postures. And so that was my first real introduction to the philosophy, the Yoga Sutra, all those things that are beyond just the postures.
Right.
Larry, we have people that listen in from all over North America and other parts of the world. Some are very experienced in spiritual practices like yoga asanas, but a lot are not. It's all new to them. They might be listening to something like this for the first time. And if somebody is in that category and they'd like to begin doing yoga asanas, what do you recommend to them? How do they find a class or a teacher that is worth going to? And, where is all yoga instruction good and alike?
Hmm. Well, here's what this is my opinion, okay?
Hmm.
I've been practicing yoga now for 37 and a half years. I've been involved in every major yoga organization that I'm aware of. And I think what's happened now is that yoga has really gotten off on this gymnastic thing.
Hmm.
And the focus of yoga classes, 80% of them are for the young and restless. They were for the people that were taught when they were 16 years old by Krishnamacharya. And so that's great for people up to about 40. But take a look at the life of a professional athlete. Kobe Bryant retired at 38. So the body changes around 40, and the majority of the population is over 40. So it goes flow yoga, chair yoga. There's like nothing in between.
Hmm.
And that's not how it should be. These people got some wind in their sails. So what people don't know is that Krishnamacharya got his first ever middle-aged Western student, Dr. Albert Franklin, who was the ambassador to India from America back in the late 60s, early 70s. So he started to teach differently. And that's what he taught his son, and that's what his son taught me. It was originally called Vinaya Yoga, and like anything else, goes through all these political things. But I just say these were the contemporary teachings of Krishnamacharya, and they were geared more towards people of all ages, but especially over 40. And so I call my yoga now Prime of Life Yoga, because that is really 40-something to 70-something. Still got some wind in your sails. You don't have to do wussy yoga. You just need to modify. And these modifications are from the same man who taught Iyengar and Patabi Joyce and Indra Devi.
Right. But where does somebody go if somebody's listening in and they're in Poughkeepsie, New York, or somebody's in Buenos Aires, South America, and they think, all right, I want to go to a yoga class. I'm inspired by what Larry is saying. How would you recommend they find a yoga class that's going to serve them well?
Well, the word Vinaya Yoga is still out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I would recommend that. And then I have a lot of the Prime of Life Yoga students. My website, samata.com, samata.com, has a lot of the students who have graduated from this. The other thing is that I have 7 DVDs, and recently we put them onto app form. So there's a 21-day program for people anywhere in the world who can get started on any form of medium, and that's just recent. I'm real proud of it. So, but if you go at the website under products, it says 21-day program, and it reminds you every day to do your practice, and then it says how do you feel. I mean, it's pretty cool.
We should mention for listeners who are not familiar with these names that you mentioned Krishnamacharya a few times, and we should point out that he was the sort of great reformer or revivalist or innovator, however you see the history of Hatha Yoga in the last century, and that 2 of his students were Iyengar and Patabi Joyce, who had a big impact on the West, and the other was Indra Devi
and Desikachar.
And Desikachar was your teacher, am I correct?
He is, and also my other teacher with him and Indra Devi was A.G. Mohan, who was also a direct student of Krishnamacharya.
Very good. So we have the lineage.
Yeah.
So tell us more about Prime of Life Yoga, because this is a recent sort of entry into the world of modern yoga, and you're a baby. What originally made you turn to that age group, other than being in it yourself?
I watched people getting injured in the classes. And then this whole thing came out in the New York Times, yoga can wreck you and all those things. And while some of that stuff, was pretty exaggerated, but a lot of it was really true. I mean, every weekend there's a man that's 50 years old that's in a yoga class at some retreat center, and there's a good-looking young girl there teaching, and he's in what is called Paschimottanasana, seated forward bend with his legs straight, and following her example, he starts reaching for his toes and tries too hard and throws his back out. Every weekend that's happening in America. You talk to the chiropractors, the physical therapists, they're all saying that people are coming to them being injured in yoga classes. It's because yoga is so available now, and they're mainly focused on this under 40 group. It's really true.
Yeah.
Well, now, what do you go ahead.
And most of the teachers are young these days because
a lot of them they teach that way because they're pressured into teaching that way. But what's happening is since I started training teachers about 5 years ago, this has taken off. Like just in the last 3 years, I am in Princeton, Austin, Orlando. It's San Francisco, and it's getting some wings, because
people are getting older.
Yes, and also these people have some wind in their sails. They're not just throwing it out there to pasture. And I researched. There's over 120 million people over 40. Yet 80% of the yoga is for the young and restless.
Well, let me ask you about that, because this is not clear to me. The yoga that's for the people under 40, is that good for them? I mean, like this Bikram yoga or these yoga classes where there's extreme heat, or it's almost like an aerobics class and you have an instructor up there.
I think it's good for the people under 40.
You think that's
good?
Because we've had other, and I just want to get your opinion.
Yes.
I've heard other yoga teachers say that they're really, really moving away from the tradition of yoga, what yoga was set up for, and getting more and westernizing it. In other words, it's not about going inward. It's not about enlightenment. It's not about integrating mind and body, but more about getting a body for the beach or building your cardio or whatever else. People and all of that's fine. Yeah, but I'm just wondering what your feeling is about ultimately what yoga is for, and how these different classes serve or do not serve folks.
Well, I had the privilege of going to India 4 or 5 times when these people are all alive. I got to learn from the real masters, and they always taught me that yoga was more than asana. They also taught me that yoga was about being an example, and how you treat people, etc. Pretty much the yamas, and that was from the very beginning, and even in the Shivananda, and then with Deskachar, and I went to a lot of teachers, and at that time I was still on a sabbatical from McCall's magazine, so I was a guy from California with a press card, a camera, a video, and a tape recorder, and the only person who turned me down initially was Krishnamacharya. I had to wait 2 weeks just to meet him. And then what happened is that he broke his hip, and the next time I came to India, his son asked me if I would do a tribute to him in America. And then when I said yes, I was invited in, and he did an 1 hour and 20-minute ceremony on me. And then I made this thing, and I made it into a vintage video that's available also. That's 80 minutes. It's not like watching Homeland, but it has Deskachar in his prime, Indra Devi with the only English-speaking video that we have. And all these old masters, it's pretty good for people who are, serious about the yoga practice.
So are you concerned with, like some of the other yoga teachers we've interviewed and people I've chatted with, are concerned about the one of the side effects of the popularity of yoga is the churning out of yoga teachers and the quality of training. Are you concerned about that?
Oh yes, because I'm the founder of the co-founder with Richard Miller of the International Association of Yoga Therapists, and I have a school at Loyola Marymount for the last 12 years where we train yoga teachers to be yoga therapists. So we get them from all the different schools. And it's fascinating that the statistic is of all the people who take yoga teacher training, less than 20% of them end up teaching longer than 2 years.
Really?
So they're taking it for their own personal growth, which is fine. And there's a million teachers, so this is why it's, some of these schools exploit people because they can get them for like $20 to teach a class. And then if they don't want to do it, somebody else comes along, So it's not, so you really have to go with the places that, have a good name, have the good teachers. And the people ask me, how can you tell if it's a good yoga class? I've told some people, go sit outside the yoga class and see who comes in and out of the class. That's one of the ways. But, certain schools have these, good reputations. And a lot of them were from Christian Acharya, like Iyengar School, Ashtanga Yoga, Patabi Joyce, but especially his. That's the one that's really the hard one, and usually, that's fine up to about age 40, and then, body does change, so you make these modifications. So Christian Acharya taught that yoga is for 3 stages of life. You have the beginning stage in India. These people get initiated when they're 8 years old, the Brahmin caste, and they get the sun salutation and the Gayatri mantra and a few other things. And but these stages are a little different in India because people get married really young over there. So that second stage happens really early for them. And then for them, by the time they're like 55, 60, they're like retired, ready to go out and find God, We're here in the United States, that second stage, or that first stage goes all the way up to 40-something. And then this middle stage, second stage, goes on and on and on because we keep finding ways to make ourselves happy and have a better life and not have as many physical problems. The third stage is what they call yoga, chikitsa, or yoga therapy. So those are the 2 areas I'm involved in that are pretty, correlated. People won't start having a lot of serious back problems until they hit about 40.
Mm-hmm.
And so these kind of tie in together very nicely, the prime of life yoga and the yoga therapy.
Larry, how much time do you put in a day assuming you do put time every day into yoga practice? And do you also have a meditation that you do?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. My actual yoga practice is 15 minutes. My meditation practice is 11 minutes. And my cardio practice is a half an hour. So I put a little more than an hour into every day, 7 days a week. Some people think you should rest one day, but I think that when you hit midlife and beyond, that the cardio is pretty important, that you need to have that in there. And you don't get that from like the kind of yoga you do for midlife. You could get it if you do jumping or something with young and restless yoga. But I think, what I find is that people have the least problems are people who walk, swim, or bicycle, or elliptical is in there too. And they have the least problems. Also, Christian Acharya said that in this stage that the pranayama was much more important. Mm-hmm. And we know that leads you towards meditation. And I know both of you guys are serious meditators, but I have a pretty serious pranayama practice.
Mm-hmm. Oh, where do you fit that in?
Right after my asana and just before my meditation.
Right, that's the usual pattern. But I'm dying to know where the 11 minutes came from. It's not a typical number?
I don't know.
A Fibonacci number.
There's nothing esoteric about that?
No, I could say 108.
Yeah, that's right. 108 would have made sense.
Or
108 seconds.
10.8 minutes. Larry, about pranayama, I know not much about pranayama. I have practiced it somewhat. I have a deviated septum, so I always found it a bit challenging because it required both nostrils. But someone who's an Iyengar teacher was telling me that as complicated and sophisticated and refined as yoga can be, pranayama is even more like that, pranayama, that it's very, it has to be taught just right, and there's a lot of subtlety to it, especially as you advance in your pranayama practice. Just wanted you to comment on that because it's something I know very little about.
Well, again, this is my opinion. And I studied personally with BKS Iyengar in India, and then I studied with his teachers for about 7 years before I settled in with my teacher, Desikachar. Their whole view of pranayama is really finite. There's real a lot of detail in it. His light on pranayama has lots of detail. But you look at the Shivananda approach, and it's pretty basic for a lot of people. And then I went, in India they have this school where they have a yoga hospital, Kaivaladhamma. And there's a book they have on pranayama that's quite detailed. And so I looked at those things and, tried some of them. But then all of a sudden, here's this guy on television in India. It's on 2 channels, 24 hours a day. He's got something like 20 million followers all over the world. His name is Swami Ramdev. Now, he's controversial.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, he's controversial. But he has healed a lot of people. And he's doing 2 basic pranayamas, and guess what? They're the 2 that I learned in my first teacher training with Shivananda.
So traditional methods.
Yes, the Kapalabhati, or the shining skull, and the other one is a form of alternate nostril breathing. I've taken the simpler one, just, what you call Nadi Shodan, or channel cleansing, even on each side. They do one that's more complicated. And also, this Kapalabhati we call shining skull, there's a simple way to do that, because when you do the traditional way in a yoga class, you're going to pass out the tissue because everybody's blowing snot around. But one thing I have to give Bikram, and I'll just leave it like that, is that he had one variation that's pretty good. You hold up your index finger and you blow it out like you're blowing out a candle. You blow hard, and you do that probably like 20, 30 times. And then you take a deep breath, you let it out, you take another breath, and you hold it for a long time and let it out. You do the other side. And that's a very user-friendly way to do Kapalabhati without having to spread tissue around the room. But those 2, for whatever reason, I studied many of the pranayamas and all the details, but those 2, Kapalabhati and, some form of alternate nostril. I happen to like the Nadi Shodan, the channel cleansing. You can do a lot with that.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the origin and development of yoga therapy as a discipline, because you were there right at the beginning, and it was.
Well, I think I was, and it was because I got this training from Desikachar. He actually, at about my 3rd visit, he let me go into the clinic they had there. They had the Krishnamacharya Yoga KYM Yoga Mandram. They had like insurance from the government of Southern India where people could go in there with any kind of problem and get yoga therapy.
This, I should add, is in Chennai, what used to be Madras.
Yes. So I got to go in there and work with a few clients and also look through all of their records. And so what happened when I came back this last time, Dr. Leroy Perry at the International Sports Medicine Institute gave me a space to open the first yoga therapy center in Los Angeles. That was 1984. and that was at the International Sports Medicine Institute. So that was the first yoga therapy center in LA and the first of its kind in the medical center in the United States. So then Richard Miller and I were in India studying with Desikachar, and I came to him with an idea. I said, why don't we start this organization? And he said, well, you're going to need a journal. He says, I can do the journal. I said, well, I can do the rest. And so I was the founding president of this AYT, which is now 27 years, 16 countries, whole lot of members. And that was really the beginning of it in America. So, I stayed involved heavily for probably like 9 years. And now the last years, I'm always around as a consultant because it's Richard and my baby. So now for the first time, they're having an actual yoga therapy certification coming from the International Association of Yoga Therapists that just started this year.
We should add for our listeners that in our archive, we have an interview with Richard and with John Kepner, who's the president of the association.
Two outstanding individuals and very special in my life, both of those people. And Richard Miller, as you in your interview you see, has gone on to do huge things. But here's the true story. On my trip right after meeting Richard Miller, next time I went to India, I came home and I had a present for Richard Miller. And it was a book from the Bihar School of Yoga called Yoga Nidra. And I gave it to Richard.
and he ran with it.
He ran with it.
Yeah, he's the yoga nidra guy in America now.
Yeah, there you
sure
go.
Did.
You never know. Well, Larry, I want to thank you so very much for taking the time
pleasure
to come on with us today. And we'll have posted up your website and information
Thank
on
you.
your books and everything at spiritmatterstalk.com. And again, thank you so very much for your time.
A pleasure, and also thanks to you, Phil.
Let me add that one of the books one would recommend is the book Larry and Georg Feierstein wrote called Yoga for Dummies. So for all the dummies who want to know more about yoga and yoga philosophy, that's one that's highly recommended. And maybe you could briefly mention the latest book, the sort of yoga therapy.
And also, anybody who's written any of the read any of the dummies books know they're not really just for dummies. I mean, they're well written.
I use them all the time. Yeah.
Thank you. It's in 14 languages. The latest book is called Yoga Therapy and Integrative Medicine, which I co-authored with Dr. Eden Goldman and Dr. Tara Gold.
And it's a very rigorous book about research in yoga therapy and the applications of it in different...
It's pretty good. We have really outlined all the major schools and their origins and, some of their ideas. And for people interested in yoga therapy, it's a good book.
Very good.
All
Any
right.
final words for our listeners, Larry?
Be an example.
Okay.
All right,
deal.
we'll take that one to heart. Phil and I,
Thank
anyway.
you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks again.